Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to those from our IHRP community, as well as to all our friends joining us here today. This webinar is co-hosted by the Institute for Human Resource Professionals, IHRP, and our esteemed partner, BDO. For those of you who may not be familiar, BDO Singapore is a full-service professional audit, tax, and business advisory firm, proudly serving businesses of all sizes from SMEs to MNCs across a range of industries. My name is Wendy Chin from IHRP, and it's my pleasure to have so many of you join us here. Today, I'm delighted to introduce two wonderful friends of IHRP who are our guest speakers, Ms. Nellie Yeoh, Associate Director and Practice Leader for People Advisory in BDO Singapore. Nellie is seasoned human capital and operations strategist with over 15 years of experience. She advises local and MNCs on enhancing work performance through performance management, change leadership, and talent development. Our next speaker, Mr. Nigel Ho, is the Senior Manager and Practice Leader for Agility Advisory in BDO. He focuses on end-to-end supply chain, procurement, and manufacturing operations strategy. With over 20 years of leadership experience across APAC, Nigel brings a proven track record in unlocking operational value, driving transformation, and building resilient, future-ready supply network. Today's webinar will focus on navigating global shifts and their impact on HR strategies, the tariff Tangle. We all can agree that in the midst of market volatility, it's even more important that HR leaders are well equipped with the strategic foresight to navigate disruptions ahead. We hope today's session will prepare you with the foresight and the insight that will help you with your work. Before we start, here are some housekeeping. There's going to be a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, so please ask your questions, and those with the most upvotes will be attended to first. We also have a feedback survey at the end of the webinar, and we hope you will take a minute to share your thoughts and other topics that you would like IHRP to bring to you. If you like resources from today's webinar, do indicate your interest in the survey form at the end of the webinar. With that, we want to welcome Nellie and Nigel to kickstart the webinar.
Thank you, Andy. Hi, everyone. I'm Nellie here, and I'll be speaking on this topic with Nigel. We will try to make it interactive since this webinar. And today we are here to address two key questions, which is how, I think everybody have this question in mind. How does this tariff actually impact my organization, right? And my function in HR? And also collectively, then how can the different HR functions, because we might have people from larger HR teams, can work together to actually prepare the organization to face this ongoing volatility as well? And why does this matter now? So I will start off by saying you would see in the newspaper every day, online media, that will be an article on global trade tensions. So I won't talk about this too much. So therefore, we need to just understand a bit more, how does this impact the organization? But it is impacting actually our GDP in Singapore. So actually, MAS has actually revised the GDP growth recently on this impact towards the economic outlook. So a lot of people are also a bit more cautious with the clients that I talk to. They're also very cautious with spending. But actually, this is also a great way for HR to be at the forefront of navigating these changes. And also how we can cascade or make sure some of these initiatives on the people's impact. So before we begin, what we wanted to do is actually have a quick poll to get a bit of sensing of everybody's understanding about the trade impact. Okay, so we're going to start off with our first poll question here. So over here, Nigel will share a bit about his thoughts about how you should answer the poll question.
Okay, thank you, Nelly. I think we have to see the poll question first. Okay, I think what's important is this. It's not good enough to say that, you know, you're addressing the impact of the trade war by merely mentioning about it, talking about it in the news, things like that. But when you look at these folks here that you choose or you select from here, are they currently taking any proactive action or planning to make the company more resilient, make the business more resilient, and preparing for uncertainties above the horizon? So that is important. And don't just talk about it, but also plan and act on it, and also be proactive about it. So when you select the folks are currently involved or engaged with planning for this trade war, the impact of the trade war, do have that in your mind. I think it's important for us to also start to realize, you know, are there anybody who's just hanging back, waiting for things to happen? I think as business, we have to plan ahead and make things happen, or some other people will make things happen for us. So it'll be interesting to see.
So let's look at the results now. Yeah, so as I think, Nigel, as we expected, we do forecast that when we put up this pool, we do felt like a lot of people will choose the CEO and the leadership ones as obvious, the crucial ones to direct. And over here, maybe I'll just comment that there were very few that have formal teams. So the reason why we have the selection of formal teams is because these are the teams that specialize in addressing some of this impact and be able to prepare ahead for what's ahead in terms of the trade war. And it's also worrying that we have about a third who actually don't really know what's actually, or who actually in the organization is addressing this.
Yeah,
That's an interesting.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit disappointing for me because I come from operations part of it. I noticed that operations is just being reactive and not thinking ahead, because operations is actually the lifeblood of supporting the business and making sure that the customers receive your goods and what have you. So that part, I think, needs to be improved. It's a good takeaway, I would admit it. But like what Nelly has said, if we don't know about things, then things may make us know very soon.
So this will falls in nicely to the next to how we're going to introduce this topic. So Nigel?
Yeah, okay. I think we all recognize this person these days. We watch a lot of him on YouTube, on the news and things like that. And you see the statement on the left that he says that tariff is the most beautiful word to him in the dictionary. He actually said that. And that, to me, or to anyone who's economics trained, is a very worrying kind of thing. Yeah. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so let us begin by understanding a bit about what tariff is all about. Essentially, tariff is a tax imposed by the government of the importing country that is incurred by the importer, not the exporter, by the importer. And we all understand that what does this actually mean? For example, you're bringing in a container of frozen chicken, right? The chicken arrives at the port. So what happens is that the importer need to pay the tax to the U.S. government, for example, before it goes in. And when this tax is paid, it increases the cost of importation. And more often than not, this cost is actually being transferred to the end consumer. But bottom line is this: why did this happen in the first place? Well,
Hi, just a slight
to the
interruption. Yeah. The mic was
Sorry,
turned
I
off
think
earlier.
okay, we'll repeat. I think what happened is because I think yeah. Can you repeat again?
Oh, okay. So, okay, just to repeat again, okay, let's understand a bit about what tariff is all about. So tariff is basically a tax that's imposed by the government of the destination country on the imported goods, right? That is actually going to be paid for by the importer. So to give you an example, we bring in a container of chicken, right? We some camera on? Sorry, we bring a container of frozen chicken, right? And this container arrives at the port. Now the importer will have to pay for the tax for it before bringing it in. that increases the cost of importation. And as a result, more often than not, this cost is actually transferred to the end consumer. So the end consumer would end up paying for increased costs.
So does it mean, Nigel, if I buy products from a certain country, it means more expensive? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it would inadvertently lead to that. Right? Some of the importers may absorb the cost for a while, but this is not something that's sustainable in the long run.
Okay, so maybe let's go back a bit about the history.
Yeah. So let us examine what really started it all. Now, here we're looking at the trade surplus, meaning to say, hold on, what's my message? Sorry, 1 second. Maybe I take over the microphone. Okay, can you hear me now? Right, okay. So let's see what actually started it all. All right. If you look at this chart here, it's actually a chart summarizing the trade surplus, right, between the country that's exporting to the US and what US is. So meaning to say that if you look at China, China is exporting more goods to the US than US is exporting back to China. So it means to say that the trade surplus is really, really huge. Now, if you look at the whole chart here, you notice that the EU is actually right behind China. And if you hear from the news, Trump has already said that he's going to target the EU very soon. But for all of us here, what is more troubling is that if you look at Southeast Asia, it's not too far behind the EU. It means that after the EU is done and dusted, I think Southeast Asia is going to be in the sights of Trump. Now, not all of this contributed by the countries around us, but if you look further up the line, you'll see that Vietnam actually constitute a large part of Southeast Asia's substrate surplus to the US. So Vietnam is going to be targeted next. And we know that Trump doesn't differentiate between friend or foe. He's going to apply the tariff. His objective is to reshore or apply tariff on you.
Maybe we pause a bit and talk about what is reshore.
So reshore is talking about, okay, if you're going to export to my country, for my country, in order to enjoy or to circumvent the tariff, it will be better for you to set up your manufacturing operations, for example, in the US. So that is his entire objective. If you insist on producing outside of the US, like in China, for example, then it's going to be a case of, okay, then I will apply tariff on you so that I have a level playing field with you between my domestic market, the manufacturers, and yourselves. And we are seeing that happen every day at the moment. Can you move to the next slide, please? So just to touch on what has happened of late, as of 2nd of April, there was some time back, I think more than a month back, you realize that you remember that the US applied reciprocal tariff. And this came about because he discovered that many of the countries that he does business with, the US does business with, are applying a high level of tariff on US goods entering their country. So what he's done through a very sophisticated formula, not accepted by a lot of people, he has applied another set of tariff against these various countries, which is less, which is the gray bars that you see there, right? It's just less. And let's zero in on China, for example. He first started off with 34% on China, right? And then eventually he escalated to 145%. And China, on their side, they move it up to 124%, right? Let's move on to the next one, please. So here, what I want to showcase to you is that a trend that has been happening between the trade war between the US and China. They first started off with a 15% on February the 4th. This very quickly escalated up and up all the way to, like what I mentioned, 125 versus 145% tariff against each other. Now, of late, May the 12th, just a couple of days back, they agreed on a 90% pause, a 90-day pause.
So Nigel, wouldn't that be good? I mean, there's some certainty now.
Well,
90 days pause, right?
It'll be good depending on, I can talk about it. Yeah, it may appear good on the surface, but it's still 90 days. What happens after 90 days? If for example, the negotiation goes sideways, and you know, they mentioned they will continue to negotiate. If the negotiation goes sideways and the trade war continues, then all hell will break loose. Essentially, it will affect the markets, it will affect businesses. not just the stock market, but also all the businesses, then what happens? And we hope that it doesn't happen, because it seems that both sides now are coming to the same conclusion that they need each other. They do not want to apply an effective trade embargo that we witnessed with the 125 and 145% tariff on each other, right? So let's keep our fingers crossed. But one thing for certain, or rather two things for certain, China is prepared to lock step in step with you in terms of retaliatory tariffs, number one. Number two, there is still a level of uncertainty. That will lead to one thing. Companies will refrain from investing until things stabilize, right? I think that's the thing that we have to come to a conclusion. No one's going to invest. Everyone will hold back, right? Let's move to the next one slide.
So what's the implication then to the business?
The implication to the business, as I mentioned just now, is that companies will hesitate. Companies will hesitate, right, in investing. Now, I want to show you a formula, which I think some of you will be very familiar with, especially those who have studied economics, right? This is GDP equals C plus I plus G plus NX. What does it mean? Let me explain a bit. GDP, as we all know, is gross domestic product. And for us to understand a bit better, when do we come into a recession mode? Very simple. When there's 2 straight quarters of GDP contraction, we are technically in recession. So this GDP piece of it is dependent on a couple of things here. C, your consumption. I, your investments into your country. G is your government spending. And NX is your net export. Can you move to the next one, please? So let's try to distill what this means to us. It's a nice formula, but what this means to us. But I believe it will help us. It will help us understand the picture clearly after we look at that. Can we? Okay. So here is where I'm going to try to explain to you, right? In a situation like a trade war occurring, when it happens between China and the US, all of us are affected. What happens is that our consumer spending, because of the confidence level, will start to drop. Yeah? Then when that drop, and because of the huge uncertainty of how which side of the bed Trump is going to be waking up on, right? Companies will hold back on investment in the country. They're not going to expand capacity. They're not going to put in new facilities. They're not going to do anything until they see some stability in terms of the outcome. When the government sees that, the likelihood is that they will try to mitigate the effects by increasing government spending. Maybe they build the next bridge, right? Or they build another more roads, more infrastructure spending. Now, when all these things happening, our net export, what we sell outside, also will start to fall. Now let's look at the outer circle and look at the normal behavior of the economy. Consumer spending will start to fall. That means to say sales will start to decline. And as I mentioned just now, investments will drop and production has to reduce as well because there's less demand for the goods. This leads to a further slowdown in our economic growth, which in turn affects our unemployment rate, right? Our unemployment will rise. This part is the most important to all of us down here. And you notice there's another arrow pointing back to consumer spending reduces. So it's a vicious cycle that's going to continue until and when something positive happens to break this cycle. So essentially, if you look at the US political system, midterm elections for Trump is in a year plus, right? So if there's anything that's going to happen, if he continues on his current trajectory right now, what it means to say that is that GDP will continue to shrink. If he continues on his current trajectory, we are headed into a technical recession, at least for the next year and a half. Let's keep our fingers crossed nothing happens. Can you go to the next one, please?
So now maybe this is like on the country level, right, Nigel? So maybe let's look at the industry. But before we go into looking into the implication for each industry, let's take a quick poll to understand where our audiences, which industry that they represent.
Right. I wanted to add something. Throughout this situation that's happening, the scenario that's happening, is that different industries will be affected differently. It all depends on the economic makeup of your country. Like in Singapore, for example, right? In Singapore, we know that manufacturing comprise or determines a large part of your GDP, right? and all the others will follow suit as well, right? Depending on the economic situation. So let's see where you all come from, which industry you're at. Then later on, we will explore some of these industries, the effects of it, and what we must do to mitigate the effects.
Okay, let's look at the results. Okay, I think as we have projected, Nigel.
Yeah, we predicted a lot of it comes from others and professional services. Yeah,
Yes.
but I can't help but wonder, because the majority of the attendees here are from HR. Are they referring to their HR professional services or
Yes,
their
so they're
industry sector?
representing the companies that they represent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If in any case, if you work in a manufacturing company, right, then you should be under manufacturing. We lost the poll though. Can I see the results, please?
Oh, sorry. Can we see the results again of the poll? I think if I recall correctly, majority are others. So I think unfortunately for others, it's a bit hard for us to give comment. The next highest one was professional services, which is oh yeah, here you go.
Okay. Yeah, so the next one is professional services, right? And then obviously manufacturing comes in here. But I think if you fine tune it, you'll see a bit of a change in the whole layout here. But never mind. Let's move on and explore how what are some of the effects and actions that we need to take in the different industry, the major industry sectors. Okay, so if you look at it, this one, let's touch on manufacturing. Obviously, as I mentioned just now, manufacturing, the input costs will increase. How so? Well, okay. Yes, the cost to US consumers will increase, but many of the products that we produce, even though some of it may be made in China, right? We rely on components like semiconductors from the US. So if it's imported into China, the cost for production, even in China, is increased. Then we have a double whammy effect, right? Because if you have a majority of our stuff is made in China, then it goes in the US, it's also subject to the same kind of tariff. Depending on the value add that we put in, there's a threshold that's involved in here. A point to note is that we've been experiencing year-on-year growth, yeah, but in the last few quarters, right, in the quarter, it's been a quarter-on-quarter contraction. Now, what matters to us right now is that under the situation where our margins are getting tighter and tighter, basically your profit versus your cost of goods or cost of manufacture, then our productivity needs to increase substantially and in quick order. We cannot take our time to do that because every delay is going to affect your competitiveness in the market. Yeah.
So every delay means time cost.
Time cost.
Yeah.
Right. It will cost you, bottom line. Right. So if you look at the logistics and wholesale trade, initially, because of the transshipment and all this, logistics and wholesale will actually boost the economy. But very soon you'll find that it's going to be impacting, you're going to be impacted because of volume growth pressure. Basically, volume will fall. Not only that, you will experience port congestion. If you've seen some news, you see that at the height of the tariff application, many of the ships were parked along the coast of China and nothing is going to the US. Right now, with the US and China having agreed on a 90-day pause and reducing the tariff significantly, you'll find that people will start to take a lot of preemptive action, right? It's going to be a 50-50. If things go north, great. Then they would benefit. If things go south, then they need to quickly ship as much goods as possible. From what I hear, factories are not able to book enough containers to ship to the US at this time. Not just that, there's going to be a bit of a delay. There's going to be a bit of delay, lead time to produce the goods to ship to the US. So 90 days may not be enough for them. So bottom line is this, what it means for us, we need to start to look in terms of, we need to continue to look in terms of our efficiency. How can we manage our efficiencies, right? And while you're making use of this time to also improve upon our logistical capabilities and also plan for resilience going forward. We cannot predict with Mr. Trump what's going to happen. All right. So next thing is that you look at the food and beverage and retail. Yes, your import costs and ingredients is going to increase. Yeah. So consumers in times of uncertainties like that are going to be very price sensitive, means to say that they will look at cheaper options value for money options.
Yeah, that's quite given.
Yeah. So that said, I think a leaner supply chain is important, and the thing that will bring you forward, help you to thrive in a situation like this, is brand loyalty through different customer experience, differentiated customer experience.
Because people will want to, there'll be more players in the market, and people will have a lot more choices. Yeah, and with a thinner margin, yeah, so it does make sense.
So the final sector I want to touch on is actually construction. So construction relates to government spending to a large part, yeah, but because of the volatility in price of steel and aluminum, it is extremely difficult to how to say, do your budgeting. So for all intents and purposes, when you sell to customers, there must be some risk sharing mechanisms in place to make sure that the smooth is flow, the flow is smooth. Yeah. Okay. Can I go to the next, please? Next slide. Sorry, lost that. So how should organizations approach this? I would say that you approach it from a dual lens perspective. And by looking at, number one, take stock, what is your competitive advantage versus your competitors? And from the external side of things, the external lever is what is the customer's demand? What are they looking for? I'm not going to read through all of this, but I think it's important to understand your competitive advantage is what is your unique value proposition, for example, to your end customer. Number two, are you efficient? Are you able to scale quickly, right? Do you have the right talent and the culture to back up your competitive advantage?
That's a difficult competitive edge, I would say, to replicate the talent and culture.
I would add to that is that, when we face an uncertain situation, the last thing you want to do is to trim your muscles. Trim your fats, yes, by all means you do. In fact, you should be doing it every other month. Yeah. But to trim your muscle as a knee-jerk reaction is going to be a very dangerous thing to do for your business.
Yeah, we can talk about it a bit more in the later part.
Yeah. So the customer demand is, they're going to be looking for value for money. They're looking at trust. They're looking at a lot of things. And most important is that what is the brand loyalty, and that's actually driven by the experience that they have and the convenience of working with you. So let's move it to a 4-quadrant approach. I'm going to unmute this one. Okay. So 4-quadrant, we look at it from a 4-quadrant viewpoint, right? Where competitive advantage is against customer demand. Many companies, like I mentioned, have a knee-jerk reaction. And if you look at the bottom left corner, that's the worst part. Means to say that you're in declining mode in terms of your competitive advantage, and your customer base is shrinking, right? So the thing that will be done usually is to exit those non-profitable areas, start to look in terms of your assets, whether you redeploy or you reduce your assets, things like that, just to stabilize your margin or to mitigate the losses. Yeah, that is the worst case scenario. But for all its intents and purposes, companies or businesses should refrain from jumping straight into the lower left quadrant. Now, in situations like this, there is also opportunity for growth. Again, depending on your assessment of whether you're competitively advantaged and whether your customer base is improving. So the top right corner, you see you're growing. Yeah, you're growing. So this is where you take market share. You take the opportunity, you take market share, you invest in your people, you make sure that, you continue to invest in your capacities, your innovation and things like that.
Isn't that the best case scenario, Nigel, for that one? The green one?
Yeah, I mean, we will always hope for the best and prepare for the worst. But what I'm saying is that we don't straight away become reactive, a knee-jerk reaction where we go straight into cost cutting. Cost cutting is not the only solution. That's what I'm trying to say from a business perspective. Now, I guess the next question I would say that then, okay, this is from a business perspective. We have the 4-quadrant approach, essentially looking at it from a dual lens approach. How does it affect? How does it translate into the HR strategic approach to this? Maybe Nelly, you want to have a look at it?
So I think the that's why I guess everybody dial in is to also understand how can you in your respective role prepare or think about what you can do to further support the organizations. So now let's look back into the four quadrant again, right? So if you could see in the four quadrant, I think Nigel started off by talking like the worst case scenario, whereby it's bad, like it's inefficient, you don't have any competitive edge, and the customer demand is shrinking. So obviously restructuring will have to happen. That's why the strategy here, the HR strategy here will be realignment and right sizing. But it doesn't mean laying off, right? Because it could also mean like redesigning certain things. Well, on the flip side, you have the best case scenario. Obviously, with the growing, I mean, everything is like perfect. You have the edge, perhaps your talent and culture are great. You even have a new invention, maybe the organization has, that puts you on top. But like what Nigel said, everything moves and everything change all the time. So just because you're in growing strategy, in growing customer demand, there are certain talent strategy that HR will need to take note to see how you can leverage on the situation and protect the kind of competitive edge and protect the kind of customer demand so the company can continue to grow. So let's look at the different HR roles that we will be investigating in these four quadrants here. Yeah, that's a. So today what we're going to do is we're going to investigate into these four roles, talent acquisition. We're going to talk about what will be the hiring strategy in the respective quadrant. We're also going to touch a bit on learning and development. What would be the skills required, the area of focus, com and ban in the sense of like, should it be freeze pay or how should the incentive be reallocated? And performance management, which will be tied to KPI. How should that the KPI be different for different quadrant?
I think I would add to it, don't view a problem as a piece of rock, because every rock there could be a diamond underneath. So each of these, I would say that, in my view, are just different cuts of the rock to turn it into a diamond.
Okay. So in the first, okay, so let me take a easier one where, not exactly easier one, but at least you have competitive edge. So on this top left quadrant, right, the competitive edge, but the customer demand is shrinking, means the market is not great. So I think over here, the strategy would be how can you preserve? So how can you be more cost efficient? Right. So therefore, in talent acquisition, we talk about how can we hire people who are not permanent so that you can keep the cost. For L&D, how can we redeploy people? So when people are cross-skilled, then you can redeploy them to different functions. So generally this, because over here, although yes, we do have the competitive edge in that organization, so it could be already there could be a new innovation and things like that. So how can we further improve the efficiency and weigh it out in hopes that the customer demand will improve over time?
Okay, maybe I can add to that because I come from line management in my past life. One of the things that we've done in the past is this: when we face an uncertainty like COVID-19, for example, we didn't straight away resort to the worst case scenario and start, reducing our headcount and things like that. We actually considered redeploying, and we did redeploy some of the key staff. Most important thing is that we must be very clear about what is our core competence and who are the key players that we need to keep on board with us. Sometimes we shift them out, which we did, and then redeploy them to a different function where they can continue to contribute in a very positive way. And like what Nelly has said, at the end of the day, things don't remain static. Things are always dynamic. And when the business is ready to rise up again and start to grow and start to benefit from a recovery mode, we can redeploy them back into the function that they serve us so well.
I mean, another example here, just to jump on, back in the 2020, when the supply chain shift, some of these major logistics player also, what they did was, because there's some changes and the market wasn't looking great, so they redeployed some of these non-frontline roles to crisis function. So by doing that, the HR response, by doing that, you can accelerate your internal mobility there and also helps to prevent redundancy. I think that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, one thing not to forget also, we sometimes can take advantage of this situation here, right? We can take advantage of the current situation by preparing for the future. During downtime, it's always good to take the opportunity to upgrade your skills, your talent, prepare your business infrastructure, ready to take market share as soon as the economy recovers. So don't just all be reactive. We need to be proactive. In fact, all the time we have to be proactive, and that's where I'm coming from. From an operational viewpoint, do that. That will benefit the company a great deal going forward.
So earlier on, Nigel mentioned about like the worst case. The best case scenario, the worst case. So now let's look at the best case scenario. When we look at the best case scenario, because there is a growing customer demand, and yes, the organization is positioned in an improvement state, but that also means there might be talent poach. So over here, maybe I'll highlight in terms of com and ben, there needs to be calibrate to make sure you can also keep your key talents close. And L&D will need to then invest more heavily into maybe more forward-looking capability, leadership. And for talent acquisition likelihood, because you're in such a good position, then you'll be hiring for more emerging roles like automation, digital, and things like that. Yeah. But if we were to look at the, let me just.
1 second, there's a bit of lag.
Yeah.
Okay, you good. Yeah.
But if you were to look at the worst case scenario, as we've earlier shared, that yes, it will be preservation at all costs to ensure financial stability. So as a HR, outplacement and rescaling will happen quite a bit. Freeze of role, and perhaps the talent acquisition team will be shrink, and to redeploy some of the recruiters to support outplacement, or also to support maintaining the sort of motivation and morale within the organization. Yeah. And finally, if you're in a sort of I would call this an inefficient quadrant, because there is great market out there. It's just that internally, there's some mishaps. Then over here, it's worth to re-look into either review of the organization structure, otherwise certain specific roles. So HR will be actually positioned strategically to be able to do that, because you're in a neutral position that have sort of the oversight of the entire sort of functions within the organization. Yeah.
Clearly in this quadrant, I would say that from an operation perspective, there needs to be a business transformation, because while the market is there and is growing, you're just not able to ride that wave behind. So the big question is why? The why of things. Why are things happening this way? So this is where you still need to get busy, right? Look into your business, look into your operations, what's not happening the way it is supposed to happen. Make whatever restructuring, whatever redeployment, whatever business process, or whatever tools you require to bring it back on track, such that if the market grows, the business grows along with it, and maybe even take market share at times.
So now that we've relooked into these 4 quadrants and we understand how it actually implicates each of the HR functions. So over here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you a different flavor of perspective, actually in 4 different quadrants, so that you would be able to, strategize, make changes to how you want to plan some of these functions or some of this work plan when you present or when you talk to the business. But because we're still facing the trade wars right now. So let's actually get a bit deeper into what are the actual implications to my workforce, to my talent acquisition, like what roles that you're expected to hire, what's going to happen to the performance and rewards, and what kind of skills that we are actually going to focus on if we, the organization, are facing this trade war right now. So let me just, before that, let me just jump into the third pool question, just to understand what company you're coming from or type of company you're coming from, so that we could better help you to understand.
I suppose, Nelly, there are some differentiated approaches depending on which kind of what size of the company and the nature of the company as well.
Yes. So let's look at the responses here. Okay, so it's a good split because we do see half of SME and half of MNC with 1/4 of 1/5 of GLC. But that's a good split.
Yeah, Nelly, I recall that about 70% or 75% of the businesses in Singapore are SMEs.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, clearly the SMEs will be most highly affected by any global geopolitical shifts, right?
And SME will not have the backing of a MNC or GLCs. So, okay, let's look at our first implication. Okay, let me just move on to this thing. So when we look at the first workforce cost and structure, we've actually divided it into the different types of company that you see here. So I'm just going to address the first one, which is SME. So for SME, because if you're the one implicated by trade wars, then obviously there will be a lot more intense pressure in terms of the people cost, because usually people costs are the highest. Depending on the industry, people cost could be one of the highest ticket item in terms of costings. And when we say that build low cost upskilling, what does it mean, right? It means be creative in your hiring. So it also means offshoring, hiring outside, so you could be more mindful of the cost. And if then you could also think about multi-skill. Yeah, you can tap into skills future or create flex. So what we meant by create flex team role is you would multi-skill. So what you can do is you can upskill some of these people with multiple sort of competencies, so you can shift them between different roles when the business require, instead of hiring a new one. So these are some of the strategies that SME could consider. In fact, the other way to improve productivity or maintain costs, which not a lot of people think about, is rescoping the lower value add roles, so that you could improve the ROI of every dollar you invest in an employee. What's the return that it brings back? In fact, as we do quite a bit of job redesign, so we do see some of these inefficiency, whereby the inefficiency is like a manager doing sort of an executive kind of like administration or paper shuffling, which is not cost efficient for SME.
Yeah, I think as I manage quite large groups. What I've come to realize is that people tend to stay within their comfort zone. Even executive managers, directors, and even VPs, they stay within a comfort zone. Particularly in a situation like this is when they're needed most. They need to step up to the plate and need to be driving for improvement, driving for resiliency, driving for a lot of things. Sometimes they are being blindsided by this, and it may require, for example, HR as a strategic partner to allude them to, hey, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. I don't need you to be on the shop floor packing boxes. I need you to be up there planning your resources and what you can do to improve the productivity, for example.
That's quite spot on. And that's always, unfortunately, that's always missing as well. And it's quite spot on example. But we have quite a number of them are also from MNC. So for MNC, what would it'll be totally different. Slightly different, I would say, because for MNC, it's always alignment with HQ, regional strategies, or maybe the global sourcing or cost sourcing strategies, right? And there's always different levels. And in fact, what we are hearing also from the market is there's quite a bit of restructuring of removing the regional or different layers. So if that's happening, that is also the part where how HR can come in. And so over here I've written here, use workforce analytics. So actually what it means, when we say that, what it actually means is using real data to collect and not gut feel so that we can have decision on who should we retain. So maybe that can goes back to the ROI of the per employee contribution. And the next question that you may have is like, what skills maybe are non-negotiable because these are directly implicating the revenue. So it's very hard to draw the line without having hard data facts. But can you imagine having these hard data facts? It will be a lot stronger kind of business case for you to present to your leaders and at multiple levels also, because nobody can argue with numbers relatively, but it's also about how you paint the pictures of the numbers.
Hey, Nelly, I'm glad you actually touched on MNCs. Yes, certainly MNCs have deeper pockets. I always like to say that because I also came from an NMC environment. But the thing that she touched on here is a regional sourcing strategy. I will say this much: you do not know what you do not know until someone tells you about it. So like regional strategic sourcing strategy, strategic sourcing, regional, what does it imply? If you continue to do what you do previously and expect a different outcome, you're just lying to yourself. So this one actually is a whole host. When you talk strategic sourcing, is a whole host of steps you need to do to reduce your costs. Because you remember, your profit margin, you must have retained profits, and your retained profits are actually eaten away by your cost to produce and cost of sourcing, cost to produce essentially. I can give you a very high level, a very quick one if I may, Nelly. Like when you look at your sourcing, how many of your companies here have a very big database of suppliers? These are the long tail. So if you start to consolidate, for example, your suppliers, your volume per supplier will actually, increase, and that improves your leverage to go and negotiate for better prices as well. So this is just one snippet of it. There are many steps involved in strategic sourcing. So like what I mentioned, you do not know what you do not know. So sometimes your existing staff that's working on work, they may not be aware of the many things they can do to actually contribute to retain profits.
Yeah. So then the question for you, Nigel, is how then can HR, so should HR
the key functions? I come from operations, and I can tell you I value HR a lot, largely because I work closely with the HR folks. And HR has this advantage. They are able to zoom in, but they're also able to zoom out to the strategic level. Just because they're managing resources, which is in this case is human resources, they also have a responsibility, or rather HR has a responsibility to make sure that you sweat your assets, your resources. Your resources are contributing at their very best. Now, I've seen HR take over business operations as well. That basically tells you that HR has an all-seeing eye. And when you want to manage a business, even a P&L business, right? With the all-seeing eye, knowing where to place your assets, knowing what to expect from your assets, and holding people accountable, yeah, you can actually drive a lot of things for the good of the company. So don't become an administrator. That's the last thing you want to see. And number two is that you must be very courageous, at the same time get the bulls by the horns and say, look, you're not doing your job, you should be doing this or doing that.
So I guess with that point, that's why it's useful also to back it with data.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's always very powerful kind of defense. So it's like how you build up your powerful mechanism or levels so that you can go to the business and position yourself like what Nigel said. I mean, he's a very experienced business leader that he's sharing from the perspective of him dealing with different types of HR folks within his time during his days in MNCs. Okay, but now, okay, I think let's be mindful of our time. I think let's move on to GLCs. So GLCs, or the public sector, which is a bit more different. Okay, let me just try to navigate this. For GLCs, it's not just about the workforce cost, but it's more of about the trust, right? Because there is the public expectation, and there's always that expectation of like how money are utilized because you're a public figure. So although if there's a need when it comes to pause hiring and things like that, I think HR has to lead sort of the trust agenda of how we can maintain the morale. So the narrative is quite crucial to ensure that the morale it's always high, or at least on a decent side. But I think because the operation will still be ongoing, the commitment as a public sector will still be there. So how do you then balance the redeployment of the resource optimization as well? And after all this, despite the type of companies that you represent, I think what we are trying to say here is how do we constantly ensure that the workforce that we have, I mean, as a HR, how do we maintain the workforce that we have remain competitive and agile? I think that's the key thing that we are trying to drive here. So moving on to the second one, which is talent acquisition, we would like to ask you first, before we share, what would be the likely role? I think they are launching the pool now. Which of these role will be more in demand? I think it'll be interesting to see this.
At least from a HR perspective, yes.
Yeah. And let's look at the results. Okay. So, wow, it's an interesting split. I think everybody can see the result here, right? So, and it also sounds like everybody recognizes the digital transformation and automation,
interesting.
wow, outpace everything else. Well, I would think traditionally sales and business development, but I don't think so, which is true. So I think everybody recognized that digital is the way to go to ensure cost is low, but that will only happen after a few years of efficiency,
Yeah,
getting the
yeah.
system up.
Yeah, that one takes a bit of lead time in terms of digital transformation and automation. I can share that with you. But I'm quite impressed by this feedback because clearly HR has a very good handle on what needs to happen and what will be in demand to keep the company afloat and bring it to the next stage. So I'm very impressed by this feedback, to be honest.
So essentially, what we are saying here is the roles have to focus on supporting growth. Yeah. So as long as the role has a direct implication to improve operational or cost optimization, I think a lot of you selected digital transformation. And supply chain is obvious because I think there needs to be more boost in terms of how can the supply chain link be enhanced further or review or relooked at with Gen AI potentially, and obviously sales. But I see sales is not the top one, it's the last top three.
Yeah, market is not growing, it's not growing. So maybe I can add a bit of thing. When we talk supply chain, many people will say that, oh, when you look at supply chain, you need to look at it from a value chain standpoint. It starts all the way from your planning function to your manufacturing function, through procurement, through everything, all the way to your customer service and even the last mile. I think that's important. So when we look at supply chain, please look at the full spectrum right across. And therein lies where all the opportunities are. So when people engage me, for example, to look into their supply chain, I tend to go beyond the traditional definition of supply chain. I will look into your manufacturing. Are you suffering from bullwhip effect? I'll look into your planning efficiency, for example. All these are very important things to consider. So HR, have a look at it, have a big picture view, but also being able to zoom in to the very nitty-gritty of it.
And I think it's also crucial at times like this, right, to actually leverage on your own employer brand to highlight some, job security and upskilling so that you could, as an employer, from HR point of view, you could stand out as well when we talk about talent acquisition. And it's also because right now we are also venturing into where permanent roles are not that no freelance role and contract roles are becoming more common than before. So always consider this option and not just full time, even outsourcing and things like that. In fact, because we do run outsourcing for HR and for accounting as an accounting firm, right? We are seeing an increased sort of demand in this area because we are seeing like most organizations are trying, to streamline and cut down the costs. And it's easier also to get rid of companies rather than employee, I guess. So companies are moving into these areas and focusing on their key competencies to strive on.
Maybe I can add a bit to that, Nelly. I used to lead the APAC function, and my customer service team in Japan, I had 12 customer service professionals in there. But out of these 12 customer service professionals, only 3 are full-time. The rest, 9 of them, are actually on contract work. And all of them would hope to be converted to full-time eventually to enjoy the benefits. But Japan is a good example of where the workforce is actually generally headed. And to Nelly's point, yeah, you when you do this, you embark on this kind of scheme, you have the flexibility to scale, right, or to shrink. But at the same time, you also have the opportunity to assess who's the best fit and the best employee to convert to full-time, for example. So that happens to my customer service function in Japan, as an example.
So I think the you're trying to highlight here is agility. How we as a HR could maintain a workforce that's always agile. Maybe I can share another example where we actually have a tech company. Interestingly, half of their demographics or their workforce are contract freelance based. They have the most crucial projects are actually delivered by one guy remotely in US. And yet they continue to sustain their competitive edge. So I'm just putting out a different perspective of thinking about talent acquisition. Moving on to the next one, which is quite crucial, performance and rewards. Because now, in a way, we're okay, maybe I should rephrase it, not new business reality, but constant changing business realities. With the constant changing business reality, performance metrics become even more crucial to provide clarity for employees. But that doesn't work alone. Obviously, the alignment with reward structure or incentive structure is crucial. But the key point here, why I put it as like a triangle, is because the key point here is the narrative and the communication is crucially important. Because if you have the perfect program, but the narrative and the communication is not cascaded to the different team leads and down to the different poor fella, poor executive who's trying to fulfill, then it just the program will not work. So you will need these key elements to make sure. And over here, I will also highlight earlier on when we look at the 4 quadrants, there will be different types of KPI sort of directive that you'll be looking at. Like, for example, if it's in a perfect scenario, obviously the KPI will be more transformative, pushing the boundary, versus on the flip side of the worst case scenario, it'll be like for survival mode. Yeah. And the last piece, which I will talk about, would be learning and development. So in learning and development, the reason why I put the pervasive culture of continuous learning, because I think we all heard enough that reskilling, relearning it's sort of a mandate now. It's like a given. I enjoyed listening to a lot of podcasts, and most of the leaders in the podcast will just say that I'm always learning, I never stop learning. So it's just this kind of culture that we have to inculcate within the organization. And that's why the digital literacy is quite crucial, and how we can also improve that with the data data side of things. As we know, data is becoming more crucial. There are a lot more opportunities for organizations to collect data. But without knowing the know-how, that's why learning comes in place. Yeah. So I think this is the last point that we wanted to sort of address to talk about this key implication. And it's a bit more fluid in this area. We didn't pinpoint any specific like functional or technical skill because of the changes in the business. So we sort of point out what are the crucial ones to think about. Training now, I would say, is no longer the usual, but it's actually workforce survival. And unfortunately, there's this saying, capability building is your cheapest insurance against these changes right now.
Yeah, I just want to highlight one thing while we're at this, is that HR is often viewed as a very neutral party. Because when you're in an operational silo, you tend to be very defensive, sometimes to the point of being illogical. Because there are a lot of things that we need to do, and some of the actions that we need to embark on can be quite painful, right? It can also cause you to lose territory. So this is where folks like HR, that's why it calls strategic HR involvement. They'll come in and they'll call a spade, and they will know where to look, and then cause people to start to think right. I think that's very important, to think right. So take full advantage of your very privileged position to influence the company to move in a correct strategic direction.
So now that we explore, the different types of the HR life cycle under pressure and even in the different, quadrant, a question to you. You guys are all here in the webinar. Whether you're a manager, generalist, partner, executive, whatever functions, how are you going to take this through? Right? What do you envision to take it through? Our last slide would be we've put together some tailored scenarios for different HR roles here. So you would see HR managers, the most common ones. I will not go through in detail, but basically what we are trying to say here is the responsibility really depends on the type of role and organization that you belongs in. And it also looks into the maturity of the organization as well. So in different roles, there will be sort of different scenarios that HR could play a role or could play a function. So we hope through this session, we are able to provide you a very different perspectives of thinking through how you could then activate in a very small way. It doesn't matter as long as you take a step forward. But over here, I'll just end off talking about the SMEs HR generalists, because that's one of the, I think, top population I have here. It's potentially, they're always being pulled in so many directions. Right, so that's why I have here that you might potentially be stepped into all the different roles to coordinate not only the workforce or the employee side, but also operation. So that's why the SME HR is always so stretched in handling this, and they will always not have time to do the proper HR roles as well.
Not just that, they often don't have enough people as well.
Yeah, but the senior leaders are key here, because senior leaders are the one that have to sort of lead to say that, we are going to, lead through this. This is, our legacy will be able to pull us through this. And also be proactive thinking steps ahead about how to prepare the organization ahead. So HR is always there to be the supportive role of how then we can enable the upskill the workforce to make it happen.
Right.
So what's the key takeaway we have here today, Nigel? So I think you started off with the trait, all you need to know.
Yeah, I think we have to recognize that things. 1 second, I'm mute. Right, we have to recognize that things are still in a state of flux, right? Things can evolve and can go sideways, but we all hope that it will not go sideways. So we plan for the worst, hope for the best. So means to say that, all the things that we've talked about from a human resource aspect, from your process efficiencies, from your business prioritization and things, all these need to come into play, and they need to be done at a rate, at a pace which is fast enough. It's not good enough to continue to do the things the way we do, because and expecting something different to happen, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So being proactive rather than reactive is very key at this point in time. As I mentioned, HR plays a very strategic importance in any organization, whether it's an SME or MNC. Take the lead. I think that's where people will listen. They're prepared to listen because you do not belong to any particular functional silo. You are working for the company. You're just the next best thing to the CEO and the CFO. So you know that.
And I think more crucially, I think it's to understand the implications of the trade volatility and how it affects the different HR function. And what we are hoping that this session will give you some different perspective about how you can then take on to be the partner or be the HR strategic partner to your organization. So I have the last poll. Hopefully we get to inspire you. Our last poll is about what are you going to do since you've learned all this? Yes, we are definitely more than happy to share this slide so you can digest a bit more. But I really want to see what can you do about it, or what do you think you want to do about it? Yeah.
I'm just looking at some of the questions here. Maybe you address the questions later here.
Yes, we have some questions on the Q&A. Yeah, so maybe let's look at the results. Yeah, this is more of a reflection for you guys, because we really want to see, oh, wow, okay. Wow, I'm glad that we are able to inspire some. Maybe it's already in your work plan. Great. We hope that we validate some information for you. But yes, workforce scenario planning, that is a very good start, right? Yes, review, redesign, because HR, I feel like HR is always at the center, that you get to know all of it, and probably you'll be in the best position versus aligned leaders, usually with other intent. Initiate a new upskilling or L&D conversations. Okay, I'm glad that our 1 hour plus is well spent. Okay, I'm still deliberating. Yes, I know there's 41% of you.
Yeah.
Let's hope that you can able to figure out what you can do.
Yeah, maybe I can add to the deliberating piece of it, right? I think always being an experienced operational leader in the past, I'm an APAC resource vice president before, right? I would say that whatever you do, begin with the end in mind, right? So if I were to look at it from a HR perspective, after you begin with the end in mind, then you start to look in terms of your organization, how you're going to structure your organization to achieve the goals, the end in mind. Then when you look at your existing workforce, you do things like bench strength analysis, force field analysis. All these things require a very deep understanding of where you stand and where you need to go to. I guess that's right, Nelly.
I think the most important thing is now you have sufficient information translated about the implications of trade wars or volatility, because it's not just a HR risk, but if we turn the lens the other side, we could also position it as a HR opportunity to be in the center. So it depends on the perspective you're taking, right? So with that, a question for you to end today would be, is your team a architect mode or a firefighter mode? So always keep that in mind. Whether, obviously in architect mode, then you'll be in a better position to leverage and things like that, rather than a firefighter mode. And how can we transition to be there, even if you're in a firefighter mode? Okay, so with that, let's
Someone asked to show the slide on what can organization do about it.
What can organization? Oh, what do you mean?
Maybe we can take this time now to go through some questions that our participants have. So Nelly, Nigel?
I think we have a couple questions. Okay. So our first question would be, okay, it's financial services.
Okay, maybe I try to answer that, right? Financial services in any economic upheaval is the first to experience the downside of things, right? So it's not good to see the financial services being affected. That's the implication. Right now, I think if those people who are in the industry, in the banking industries, they would have heard of advance notice of possible retrenchments, for example, right? But being financial services is a service industry. Without economic activity, there's no service to be provided. I think that's where I'm coming from. So do sit down together with your leaders and talk about, okay, how do we avoid trimming the muscles? Because once you lose people, to get them back is difficult. to get the right people back, it's difficult.
But we are also seeing quite a number of, I mean, I'm just reflecting back, there are quite a bit of a news article and out there about the upskilling and reskilling of some large local banks here. Oh, Wendy, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, I lost the connection really.
Yeah. So I think the local banks are taking a very proactive approach. I've seen quite a number of case studies that they were preparing the workflows. You could see obviously there's a lot of data being done to prep, like what they even analyze down to like what kind of competencies, the emerging competencies in preparation when they redesign the whole structure. And then I think they pull people through to go through some form of training. So we are starting to see a lot of large, not only financial sector, I'm seeing like large public sectors are doing that, transforming the roles, upskilling these people. The next question I have is, how should we address a situation where management is reluctant to have any semblance of incentive structure, i.e. given different allowances given to different individuals, even though they are holding the same role or job level? They claim this is for business flexibility. We see this situation quite a bit for SMEs. We service SME sector quite a bit. And because a lot of the SMEs are actually run by the bosses directly, so usually the bosses, so it really depends on the boss's mindset. And we have encountered some successes because some of these bosses that we work with are first generation. And we try to take advantage when there are second gen comes in to try to infuse and educate about com and band structure. Because the whole com and band is not just the incentive part, but it's also the base pay. And also there's the part about like, should you have more base pay or should you have more incentive? I mean, the whole structure, including benefits, right? So, so in SME, we try to tackle level by level. So firstly, can we just manage internal equity to make sure that internally everybody, if you're at this length of service with the same level of performance, at least the internal equity is being taken care of, not like some new joiner will, being paid more than someone who's been there 5 years and doing quite a good job, right? But having said that, incentive structure is a bit more difficult. Because if I can't even get past the first grade of leveling the job level, I think it's even harder to talk about incentive structure unless they are critical roles like business development where the KPI is easily measured, then probably it's easier to put up a business case to convince. So I would challenge the anonymous, the attendee who asked this question is, can you put up a business case of projecting sales or projecting whatever KPI that the job role is supposed to do and how it implicates and what kind of structure that you're proposing? Okay, so the next question is, any advice for those under talent management function? So I think talent management function is quite closely linked to sort of learning and development to a certain extent, as well as the workforce planning. For talent management, I think we touch a bit about it when we talk about hiring critical roles. I mean, it cuts across. So hiring critical roles, freezing critical roles. And then when we talk about com and band, who are the ones we're going to keep? How are we going to calibrate the compensation structure to keep key talents? So, so it cuts across those different functions, those different HR functions that we talk about. Yeah. What actions recruitment and workforce planning should do next? I think the action recruitment and workforce planning could do is to first align which quadrant, for example, your business sits in. Get that alignment right. With that alignment, that gives you a very clear role. I mean, technically, we give you some sample answers about what TA should be doing, what, for example, the performance area should be doing. So that will give you a better perspective. So, so the fourth quadrant is a very useful, I would think it's a very useful guidelines and framework that you can even share this with the business and just try to understand and map this yourself to your understanding and share this with the business and see this is how I see, where we are in a good position. Should we, be deploying more people here or things like that? Okay. The next question I have is, what is the prospect of the job market for graduates in view of trade situation? Oh, wow. Do we encourage for more SG expats to return to Singapore to strengthen the local economy?
Okay, what I'm seeing is that I'm not seeing a lot of expats being redeployed to this part of the world, at least to Singapore. You can see that when you take the train, not a lot of that as compared to previous years. And I believe that companies are very careful about deploying them because they're very expensive resources. You have to house them, you have to pay them, you have to give them allowances. But at the same time, I would encourage companies to look within. Don't just look at expat, but look within, because we are purportedly, we tell the world we have the best education system in the world, right? Our people are one of the best. But I'm also painfully aware that we may risk going into complacency and give people a chance, challenge our locals, and then see how they deliver. And but I don't think the expats are coming back anytime soon.
In terms of the fresh grad, I think I think it cuts across when we look at fresh grad. So when I hire fresh grad, I always look at their CCA, their internship, what are their involvements, because I find that in addition to the educational qualification, so a fresh grad could potentially put themselves out while waiting for a job, to interns, to any community work, so they can get some form of experience that can help them to leverage. So it's not it's so the question should be, what can I do to get myself employed, right? I mean, regardless, the market will always have its sentiment of ups and downs. So maybe that would be a better way, so that at least for fresh grad, it'll be easier to get hired, because I've also heard of cases where a fresh grad who needed passes are a bit harder to hire due to pass constraint. I think we have the last question here, which is business related. Maybe Nigel can.
Which one is that?
How can companies? This one.
Well, how can companies in the finance sector that branches are going down due to close sales and high operating costs? Okay. As I think I addressed the finance piece of it. Finance is actually a service function where there's no business activity. That one falls away. The demand for that people in that sector falls away. It's just business as it is. Retail. Well, I would say that to adapt when they're closing down size, I would say that costs are definitely going up. Ingredients are going up. Your products that you source are going up, and sales is going down. This is where you need to start to think out of the box, right? Think out of the box. How do you, for example, create brand loyalty? And brand loyalty is not what you tell people, I'm very branded. No, it's about what people think of you and say of you behind your back, right? So we have to get that one right. For instance, right? There are a whole host of other things that needs to be established. But first of all, take a look at your competitiveness and what the market is thinking of you, the 4 quadrants, for example. And from there, you can begin to have a clear direction where you're headed. So begin with that, and then from there, figure out how you move forward. But yes, it's going to be very challenging, more so for the finance sectors. So that one deserves a bit of a deep analysis as to what it can do as an alternative versus firing people. As I mentioned, it's difficult to build up people's experience and knowledge, very easy to let them go, but not easy to hire them back, because you begin the whole cycle of training them again. To another point, I would say that there is, from a HR perspective, you also need to oversee the maturity of the hiring manager. Many hiring managers will say, hey, I have so much to choose from. This one I like the face, so I hire. Wrong. That's the wrong answer. Second thing is that, when someone comes in here, being an experienced operational person, I will look at 2 things, the attitude and the altitude. Altitude is that if you're educated, you are intelligent, you're able to pick things up fast, that's great. One thing. Attitude, do you have a service attitude? Remember, we're selling our service as an employee, right? When both of these things gel And remember, there's no one that's absolutely 100% suitable for the role that you're hiring. The question in the hiring manager's mind is that how much time and effort I need to invest in you in order to bring you up to speed. That's all. Yeah.
So I think we've answered all the questions. If you wanted to get a copy of the slide, you could, I think, fill up the QR code, and it'd be great if you can give us some feedback on the talk. I think we have the last question on someone wanting to see the slide on what can organizations do about it. So maybe I can suggest for that person can also fill up the QR code. We can email you, then you can wholesale look at it also.
Yeah, so Nelly and Nigel, thank you very much for this wonderful
Nelly,
sharing
do you
session.
Want to,
they can't hear.
show the slide?
It's already shown.
We're not sure which slide actually. So
hi, so there's a QR code that is on the screen right now.
You have any questions? You can still try to push it forward. Let's see what happens.
So Nelly and Nigel, thank you so much for this session today. For the participants who are here, we would love to hear from you. If you can scan the QR code, that would be wonderful. It's a feedback form to hear from you what you think of the session today. And on top of that, for those who are keen to get a version
we will share the slide, but you'll need to fill
the slide. We will be also sending that to you post-event. Maybe we can just give you a minute here if you can't. I think we're having a bit of a technical issues. My apologies. I don't think the speakers are able to hear what we're saying, but all good. The session went well. Well, to all of you who tune in today, I hope this session has been very productive for you and that you have taken away something that you're able to apply at your workplace. On behalf of BDO and IHRP, I want to thank you all for being so attentive and for engaging us today with your questions. If you have more questions, you can put it also into the survey form. Thank you, Nelly and Nigel, for generously offering your expertise and your time to share with our HR community. We hope to see more of you at our upcoming events, in-person event and online events. And do check out Connect 2.0 if you are an IHRP certified professional. Do come check out Connect and be connected there with the rest of the community, find out what's happening, also what's up and coming, and follow us on LinkedIn too. So with that, I want to thank you all for this wonderful day, this wonderful session, and we'll see you next time.